think about a massive industrial engine. I mean, when an engine fails, it rarely just explodes out of nowhere.
Oh, it's usually a process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
First, it loses lubrication. Then the moving parts start kind of grinding against each other. The heat builds up, the friction increases, and eventually the structural integrity of the entire machine just begins to warp.
That is honestly a highly accurate way to visualize what happens to complex governance systems when they are pushed way past their operational limits.
Yeah.
We are currently watching this friction build across multiple sectors simultaneously.
So true. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a stack of sources from a major daily newspaper dated April 7th, 2026. And our mission today is really to cut through all the daily noise and figure out how these seemingly isolated events are actually deeply connected.
Right. It's all about connecting the dots.
Exactly. We're going to put on our analytical lenses, looking at polity, international relations, social justice, and technology, just to understand the mechanisms of a state trying to maintain control in an era of extreme volatility. We are looking for the underlying why and how behind the headlines. So, okay, let's unpack this.
We should probably start with the most fundamental mechanism of the state, which is the electoral machinery.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the bedrock of any democracy is the process of choosing its leaders, but the sources reveal a staggering level of, well, mechanical friction in that exact process right now.
Yeah, I was looking at the reports on West Bengal. The Supreme Court just declined to stay the freezing of the electoral rolls ahead of the April 23 and 29 polling.
Which is a huge deal.
Right. And what really jumped out at me wasn't just the legal maneuver itself, but the sheer volume of the data involved here. I mean, there were 60 lakh objections filed over what they're calling logical discrepancies.
Yeah, 60 lakh.
How does a system even begin to process 60 lakh objections just weeks before an election?
It practically can't. And that is exactly where the friction becomes critical. When you have 6 million objections, you are no longer dealing with a routine administrative cleanup. You are dealing with logistical paralysis.
Right. The system just seizes up.
Precisely. Verifying that many names requires pulling immense manpower from an already stretched bureaucracy. That's why judicial officers were brought in to oversee and verify these roles.
To kind of lend unquestionable credibility to an overwhelming task, right?
Exactly.
But bringing in the judicial officers seems to have sparked an even bigger fire. Because on April 1st, judicial officers were literally garrowed in the Malda district.
Get
And for you listening who might not know the term, garrowed means they were physically surrounded and blockaded.
Which represents a severe escalation. It moves the conflict from a paperwork dispute to, physical intimidation of the actual umpires.
And the Supreme Court did not take that lightly at all. Chief Justice Surya Kant called it a well-planned, calculated, and deeply instigated move.
He really didn't mince words.
No, he didn't. He actually invoked Article 142 of the Constitution and handed the probe over to the National Investigation Agency, the NIA.
Right.
So, for those who might not have a law degree, what exactly is the mechanism of Article 142, and why is handing this to the NIA such a massive signal?
So Article 142 is essentially the Supreme Court's constitutional override switch.
Yeah.
It allows the court to pass any order it deems necessary to do complete justice when existing laws fall short. It's rarely used for local disputes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so by invoking it and bringing in the NIA, which is India's premier counterterrorism task force, the highest court is stating that blockading judicial officers isn't just a local protest.
Right.
It is being treated as a systemic threat to the sovereignty of the electoral and judicial process.
That is wild, and that friction on the ground is also spilling over into the airways, too.
Yeah.
The Election Commission has issued a new mandate regarding political advertisement.
Yes, the pre-certification rule.
Right. If a party wants to run an ad in a newspaper on polling day, or the day immediately prior, they now require pre-certification from the MCMC.
The Media Certification and Monitoring Committee.
Yeah, that's the one. But practically speaking, how does that even work? I mean, are they reading every single newspaper ad before it goes to print?
Yes, they are. And the mechanism here is designed to act as a sort of circuit breaker against last-minute disinformation.
Like a safeguard.
Exactly, because in the past, a party could publish a massive, completely fabricated claim on the morning of the election.
Wow, yeah.
And by the time the targeted opponent drafts a response or the Election Commission issues a notice, the voters are already at the polling booths.
The damage is already done.
Right. The MCMC pre-certification forces parties to prove the factual basis of their ads before the ink even hits the paper, it slows down the speed of information to ensure its accuracy.
Which, I mean, makes sense in theory, but it also puts immense pressure on the Election Commission to act as the ultimate arbiter of truth in real time.
It's a huge burden.
And the umpires themselves are currently under a massive microscope.
They really are. Look at the Rajya Sabha chair and the Lok Sabha speaker. They recently rejected a notice from 193 opposition MPs.
Yeah, the CEC removal notice?
Right. These MPs were seeking the removal of Chief Election Commissioner Yanesh Kumar under the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968.
And parallel to that, we have the Supreme Court ordering a CBI preliminary inquiry into allegations against Arunachal Pradesh Chief Minister Pema Khandu.
Yes.
The allegations claim his family was awarded public contracts worth 12,270 crore rupees over a decade, from 2015 to 2025. Now, just to be super clear to you listening, we are impartially reporting the viewpoints, allegations, and legal maneuvers contained in these sources.
Absolutely.
We're absolutely not taking a political side or endorsing any party's claims here.
No, not at all. But looking at this purely from an analytical standpoint, removing the politics entirely, we have to look at what these legal maneuvers mean for the system itself.
Okay, let me jump in there with an analogy. If the electoral process is an engine, like we said earlier, the judicial officers, the Election Commission, and the investigative agencies are the diagnostic sensors.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. They're supposed to tell you if the engine is running properly. But right now, the sensors themselves are the subject of debate.
Exactly.
The 193 MPs are questioning the CEC. The Supreme Court is questioning the contracts in Arunachal Pradesh. When the referees become the focal point of the controversies, how does that shift the fundamental nature of the democratic exercise?
It shifts the public's focus from the policies of the candidates to the structural integrity of the arena itself.
Yeah, like you're not even watching the game anymore.
Right. If you're watching a sport and the players spend more time arguing with the referee than actually playing, you stop caring about the score. You start questioning if the game is rigged.
Right. Trust is gone.
And trust is the only currency a democratic institution actually has. Transparency isn't just a moral ideal, it is a structural necessity. Without it, the engine just seizes up.
Man, it is fascinating how the state wrestles with control on a macro level with millions of voters. But let's zoom in to the micro level for a second.
Okay.
We have an op-ed in today's sources by Dr. Kavita Arora. She's a senior psychiatrist, and she's examining the Transgender Persons Amendment Bill, which was notified in the Gazette on March 30, 2026.
Yes.
This bill fundamentally changes how the state governs individual identity.
It's a profound philosophical and legal shift, and to understand the mechanics of this amendment, we really have to look back at the 2014 NL-ELSO judgment.
All right, that was huge.
It was. NL-ELSO was a landmark Supreme Court decision that established the principle of self-identification. Simply put, it ruled that an individual has the right to self-identify their gender, and the state must legally recognize that identity without demanding medical proof.
But according to Dr. Aurora's analysis, and again, just as a reminder for you, we are drawing purely on her published medical perspective here to explore the socio-political arguments without taking a stance.
Right.
But she says this new 2026 amendment completely dismantles that self-identification framework. It replaces it with a really heavy layer of bureaucracy.
Precisely. Under the new rules, a transgender person seeking legal recognition can no longer just declare their identity.
Wow.
Yeah, they must appear before a medical board. That board conducts an assessment, makes a recommendation to the district magistrate, and only then is a certificate issued.
I want to stop and look at the actual mechanism of that medical assessment for a second, because Dr. Arora points out a glaring scientific flaw here. There are no biomarkers for gender identity.
Right.
None. You cannot draw blood, you can't run a genetic panel or put someone in an MRI machine to definitively prove they are transgender.
Exactly.
So if there is no physical test, how exactly is an overburdened government medical board supposed to verify someone's internal gender identity?
And that is the core of the medical community's concern. Because there are no objective biological markers, the assessment inherently becomes subjective.
Plus, it's just an opinion.
Yeah. Medical professionals are being asked to evaluate something that is deeply internal. Dr. Arora warns that this lack of scientific criteria opens the door to arbitrary, potentially invasive inspections that, really strip away human dignity.
And the stakes of that bureaucratic friction are literally life and death. I mean, the op-ed highlights that transgender youth already face staggering suicide attempt rates. It's estimated to be anywhere between 13 and 50%.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It really is.
Adding a layer of systemic suspicion and gatekeeping to an already highly vulnerable demographic is why psychiatrists are viewing this not as a legal update, but as an impending public mental health crisis.
Right. And there's also this terrifying new legal mechanism tucked into the bill. It introduces a penalty of up to 15 years in prison for exerting, quote, undue influence.
Yeah, that phrasing is incredibly vague.
So vague. Dr. Arora argues it could theoretically criminalize a therapist who affirms a teenager's gender identity, or an educator, or even a supportive parent.
Which creates a massive chilling effect. It forces support systems to back away out of fear of prosecution.
Just out of self-preservation.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the tension between administrative control and human reality. The state wants identity to be quantifiable data, something that can be verified, stamped, and filed in a database.
Right.
But human identity doesn't fit neatly into an administrative spreadsheet.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's assume the government's intent is purely administrative. They want this gatekeeping to prevent the misuse of welfare schemes designed specifically for transgender individuals.
Right, fraud prevention.
Exactly. Even if fraudulent claims are a tiny, 0.01% anomaly, a state still has to protect its resources. So why do medical professionals view this as an unacceptable structural barrier rather than just, a necessary bureaucratic hurdle?
Because the cost of that administrative hurdle is paid in human trauma.
Wow.
If the process of legally existing requires you to endure invasive scrutiny, psychological distress, and the threat of criminalizing your support network, the system isn't just preventing fraud.
Right.
It is actively deterring people from claiming their rightful identity and accessing necessary health care. It transforms a bureaucratic procedure into a structural violation of bodily autonomy.
Man, that's heavy. It's a stark reminder that a nation can exert absolute control over its internal laws, but that control just evaporates the second you look beyond its borders.
That is so true.
We are seeing India navigate some incredibly volatile geopolitics right now. Let's look to the east first.
Right. The relationship with Bangladesh is undergoing a massive recalibration. We're seeing a completely new dynamic under Prime Minister Tariq Rahman's government.
Yes. His foreign affairs advisor, Humayun Kubir, gave a very blunt assessment. I mean, he essentially called the era of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina a spent force.
He did.
And he emphasized that going forward, ties need to be strictly people to people to avoid the mistakes of the past.
And that phrase, people to people, is clear diplomatic signaling. It means moving away from relying on a single political dynasty and instead institutionalizing the relationship through trade, shared resources, and border security.
And we are seeing the mechanics of that actually play out right now. They're preparing for talks on the Ganga Water Treaty, they're addressing the border firing issues, and heavily pushing energy cooperation.
Right.
In fact, India is currently sending 5,000 tons of diesel over to Bangladesh.
And that specific detail, the diesel shipment, is the perfect bridge to what is happening on India's western flank.
Right.
Because you cannot talk about energy diplomacy in South Asia without talking about the Middle East.
No, you really can't, because the Middle East is currently a complete powder keg.
It really is.
We have reports of severe escalation following U.S. and Israeli strikes on Tehran. These strikes killed Major General Majid Kademi, who is the intelligence chief of the IRGC. So for those of us who aren't military strategists, what exactly is the IRGC, and why does taking out their intelligence chief trigger such a massive geopolitical earthquake?
So the IRGC stands for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They are not just a normal branch of the Iranian military.
Okay.
They are a deeply entrenched paramilitary force that essentially controls Iran's proxy networks across the Middle East, its ballistic missile programs, and significant portions of its economy.
Wow.
So taking out their intelligence chief is not a standard battlefield casualty. It is a direct decapitation strike against Iran's asymmetric warfare capabilities.
Oh, man.
And that is exactly why Iran has vowed what they are calling Operation Crushing Revenge.
And that revenge seems to be targeting the global economy's most vulnerable choke point, right?
Yes.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, straight.
I always picture the Strait of Hormuz like a global toll booth for oil, but someone has just barricaded the only exit. U.S. President Trump has issued an ultimatum demanding the strait be reopened by Tuesday, or Iran will face direct strikes. And Iran's response was almost casually defiant. They just stated they, quote, lost the key.
It's intense, and the geography of the strait is what makes it so critical. It's a narrow waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption passes through that specific corridor.
20%.
Yeah. So when Iran says they lost the key, they are leveraging their geographic advantage to hold the global energy market hostage.
And India is deeply exposed here. I mean, the sources note there are 16 Indian flag vessels currently operating in the Persian Gulf, with 433 seafarers on board.
Yeah, that's a lot of lives at stake.
Absolutely. 2 of our LPG vessels barely managed to cross the strait safely. Meanwhile, China and Pakistan are trying to drive a 5-point peace proposal, which the U.S. is reportedly entirely agnostic about.
This is the ultimate geopolitical tightrope.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the mechanical balance required here.
Yeah.
India is trying to build a completely new, delicate diplomatic bridge with Dhaka, sending them 5,000 tons of diesel, while simultaneously trying to keep its own energy supply lines alive in a Gulf that is literally under fire.
Yeah.
How does a nation balance such drastically different foreign policy crises at the exact same time?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires an acknowledgement of structural vulnerability. This is the reality for the global south.
Right.
No matter how brilliantly India maneuvers its diplomacy with immediate neighbors like Bangladesh, it remains structurally tethered to distant conflicts because of its reliance on imported fossil fuel.
Because we need the oil.
Exactly. You cannot insulate your domestic economic growth from international energy security. The diesel arriving in Dhaka is intrinsically linked to the warships patrolling the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, which sets up our final segment perfectly. If the external world is just this volatile web of choke points and missile strikes, a nation's only true defense is its internal resilience. We are seeing a massive push toward future-proofing, building technological independence, health frameworks, and infrastructure.
But as the sources show, building the future often requires tearing up the present. The pursuit of self-reliance creates its own internal friction.
A perfect example of that is the infrastructure debate playing out in Kerala right now. The Supreme Court just refused to block the construction of the Kozhikode-Wayanad twin-tube tunnel.
Yeah, that was a controversial decision.
Very. Now, environmental groups, specifically the Wayanad Prakriti Samrakshana Samiti, they raise massive red flags about drilling through the Western Ghats. It is an incredibly fragile biodiversity hotspot.
Right. It's very sensitive ecologically.
But the court pushed it through anyway, citing national importance and the desperate need to reduce traffic congestion.
It is the eternal tension of a developing nation, right? Infrastructure versus ecology. A twin-tube tunnel significantly boosts logistics, trade, and military mobility. But the Western Ghats regulate the monsoon patterns for the entire southern peninsula, so the court had to weigh economic velocity against ecological stability.
And it isn't just physical infrastructure either. It is the digital architecture as well. The Hindu Deep Tech Summit just wrapped up, and the focus was entirely on digital sovereignty.
Yes.
Amitesh Kumar Sinha detailed the India Semiconductor Mission 2.0, or ISM 2.0.
And the evolution from ISM 1.0 to 2.0 is really crucial. The first phase was largely about trying to attract foreign fabrication plants to just, set up shop in India.
Right.
But ISM 2.0 is far more foundational.
Right. He mentioned they are pouring funding into the deep supply chain, like the specific chemicals, high purity gases, and raw materials required for semiconductor manufacturing.
Exactly.
They want to create a completely made-in-lab deep tech ecosystem.
Which is how you insulate yourself from things like the Strait of Hormuz closing.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you control the raw materials and the intellectual property, you aren't at the mercy of global supply chains. And the private sector is mirroring this aggression, too.
Yeah.
I mean, Wipro just signed a $1 billion deal to acquire Mindsprint. That signals a massive pivot from India being seen as a service-based IT hub to becoming a nation that actually owns and creates foundational proprietary technologies.
That's a huge shift. But then we have another piece of the future-proofing puzzle, which is the National One Health Mission.
Yes.
This is a fascinating post-COVID initiative. It is backed globally by the quadripartite collaboration, and its core philosophy is that you cannot separate human health from animal and environmental health.
Right.
They are one deeply integrated system.
The pandemic proved that mechanism beyond a doubt. I mean, a pathogen crossing from a disturbed wildlife habitat into a human population can shut down the global economy in weeks.
Literally weeks.
Right. The One Health approach tries to monitor and protect the ecosystem as a whole to prevent the next outbreak.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Let me push back on this broader development narrative.
Right. Yeah.
Because looking at the mechanics, these policies seem to be colliding. We are blasting massive twin-tube tunnels through the fragile ecosystems of the Western Ghats in the name of economic development.
Right.
But simultaneously, we are funding a One Health model that explicitly states human survival depends on preserving those exact same environmental ecosystems. Aren't these two national priorities just fighting each other?
This raises an important question, honestly. It is the defining paradox of the 21st century for any rapidly developing nation.
Yeah.
How do you achieve absolute technological and infrastructural self-reliance without triggering ecological collapse?
Right.
The state is attempting to run on two parallel tracks that are fundamentally at odds. One track demands rapid industrial expansion, more tunnels, more semiconductor labs, more energy consumption, just to secure economic independence. The other track is frantically trying to mitigate the biological fallout of that exact same expansion. Navigating that requires a level of policy synchronization that human bureaucracies historically struggle to maintain.
It's like we are trying to overclock a computer's processor while the cooling fan is actively failing.
Precisely. And eventually, the heat catches up to you.
Wow. We have covered some massive, complex ground today. I mean, we started by looking at the intense heat and friction in India's electoral engine, the staggering logistics of 60 lakh voter objections, and the unprecedented pressure on our judicial and electoral umpires.
We examined the deep personal impact of the new Transgender Persons Amendment Bill, exploring how the shift away from self-identification places an incredible, potentially traumatic burden on vulnerable populations.
We then mapped out the geopolitical tightrope, balancing a new era of people-to-people diplomacy with Bangladesh against the looming threat of the Strait of Hormuz being shut down amidst explosive Middle East escalations.
Right. And finally, we analyzed the paradox of future-proofing, racing towards semiconductor independence and One Health initiatives, while wrestling with the environmental costs of massive infrastructure projects in the Western Ghats.
It's a vast web of moving parts, and every single thread pulls on the others.
Yeah.
So we want to leave you with a final puzzle to mull over.
Okay.
We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how the state attempts to secure its future by building incredibly complex systems, whether that's deep tech ecosystems, labyrinthine legal frameworks for identity, or global trade treaties.
Right.
But here's the thought. As our systems become more advanced, more digitized, and more bureaucratically complex, are we actually making our society more resilient? Or are we just creating a machine so complicated that when the umpires, whether they are election commissioners, medical boards, or global peacekeepers, inevitably falter, the resulting cracks will be more spectacular than anything we've seen before?
It is the ultimate question of scale. When the rule book becomes heavier than the foundation can support, something has to crack.
Think about that the next time you scroll through the headlines. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking why, keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.